Animation is at the basis of what makes anime anime, but we have to remember it encompasses so much. We remember the Kamehamehas and flashy impact frames, but even a simple walk cycle has a not so simple team of animators behind the scenes. In this category, we look to recognize the hardworking industry professionals that literally give our shows life. Here are the nominees for Best Animation of 2024.
And the jury winner for the category of Best Animation is Delicious in Dungeon. And the public winner is Frieren Beyond Journey's End.
Now, these are two pretty big heavyweights in the animation space, the respective studios being Trigger and then, of course, Madhouse. But I have to say, I wasn't really expecting Delicious in Dungeon to do so well. Could you explain a little bit behind what you see is some of the pros of the animation in Dunmeshi?
Delicious in Dungeon is definitely an interesting winner for the jury category due to the fact that rather than kind of like innovating with sort of like new ways of presenting the sort of like animation pipeline into sort of like the 21st century, it kind of tries to reinforce the sort of like basic principles of the layout that we basically like saw in kind of like improving until like very recently, until I would say the early 2010s, when things started getting more rougher in that area. And it really tried to focus a lot on kind of like old-timer like freelancers and internal animators compared to, for example, Frieren, that is instead very, very keen on to bringing a lot of newer animators and newer supervisors into the sort of like the big names of the production. In this sense, I would argue that while there are definitely a lot of other shows that had like definitely flashier type of action and definitely like there were like a little bit more innovation even. At the end of the day, Danmeshi was really able to kind of like give every single sort of like character and every single creature kind of like their own sort of physicality in a way that felt very deliberate and very top to down in terms of the reasoning and in terms of like the execution of those kind of physicalities. While, for example, in Frieren, while Frieren has a lot of incredibly good scenes that really showed both like kind of like the sort of like context on which the characters that they were living in, but also the general, I would say, like kind of like their general sort of like personalities and the full atmosphere of the work. In Danmeshi, there really is kind of like a lot of, I feel like, pre-production work that started from kind of like the general director, then to go to like the animation supervisor, and then to the individual animator with like very specific intent in mind. While I feel like that something like Frieren, for example, was really able to just kind of like capture the individual talent of individual animators. And that kind of approach is, unfortunately, I would argue, becoming really, really common in a lot of other shows, because in the nominees, for example, stuff like, for example, Elusam, Dandadan, Makine, and then Unlock, Historia and Kaiju number 8, all of these kind of like enter, in my humble opinion, into that kind of like category. While, like probably only Big Euphonium and a little bit Oshinoko, they kind of like try to keep like sort of like consistent, sort of like worldview within the animation department.
Which is what like Kyoto Animation and like Dogo Kobo are really known for, right? A lot of like their own in-studio staff. So, Delu, I just wanted you to talk on about exactly what came into this decision. I know a lot in the animation jury. There's a lot of conversation about like consistency, right? So, I think a lot of the times something that scores really high on the public side has a lot of like really big moments. So, like obviously, Frieren, as you can see in the reveal screen here, the big moment where she like is fighting herself as a boss fight and basically summons like a black hole. Those are like really heart-stopping, wrenching moments. What kind of went into the thought process between this kind of ranking for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think if you look at the jury this year, very much it was a case of, not to say really subjective views, but more so like varied kind of preferences. So consistency was something that came up for sure, but also those kind of like, Sakuga highs, as they want to say.
All about the Sakuga, baby.
Lots of Sakuga. This year was interesting in that there was a lot of really impressive sequences in these shows, especially Frieren and Dungeon Meshi, those being our two top ones. But I think when it comes to why the top two ended up being what they were, it was definitely very close between the two. I think for many, especially because both shows are, two core ventures, consistency comes into question. Both are very consistent. They've got really strong, even beyond stuff that you'd see on like the Buru, very strong drawings and sequences across each episode, very high consistencies. But I think for the jury, it came down more to just the amount of highs and variation. The jury really likes those creative showings, and Dungeon Meshi kind of feels like it has the most of those like departures, so you can really feel the episode director or like animation directors come through and what their vision is for the episode. So for us, I think that was what made it push above Frieren. But to say, first or second, they're both incredibly strong shows. And that carried it on to the rest of the category where you can kind of batch shows into kind of different baskets. So say we were talking about Hibike Euphonium and then say Elusive Samurai. I'd say they're a bit different where Elusive has some weaker showings in terms of like animation strengths, but they're at least trying to do something that's visually stimulating or interesting. And there's some really incredible individual sequences each episode, very different art styles, different animation techniques and stuff, and those all come through really impressively in the show. Whereas Hibike, I feel like, is kind of like the evolution of the series at this point, where it takes the highs from say the first season, maybe some of the movies and second season, and puts them all through. So it's an incredibly consistent, high executed work, but it doesn't have those kind of flashy highs that impress some people more. So those are definitely really close. And as for the rest of the nominees, they kind of more of a case of they'll have really high, impressive sequences or individual episodes down as number 7, for example, and some of the earlier ones for Heroine. But after that point, there's just too many, not as cleanly executed episodes throughout the whole run, right? So that's when the consistency comes in. So to sum it all up, I would basically say top ones are the most consistent shows with the most individual and impressive highs and episodes you're like, oh, I remember that one when this director was showing off this scene and stuff like that. The rest, everything below that, good shows, impressive drawings, but not quite as consistent.
Yeah.
Now, Far, I had a specific question for you, if you don't mind. Being that you have so much like production management experience, the fact that you are now the head of your own studio, which
Congratulations on that, by the way.
Yeah. Subscribe to the Patreon, patreon.com/.
Yeah, there you go. Buddha Productions. So what I wanted to ask real quickly is that there's been a lot of hype and discussion around the animation director for Frieren specifically, right? It's Keiichiro Saito.
Yeah.
Everyone loves him. It's a lot of hype. But what I'm wondering is like, how much do you think that him solely as a director is influencing these productions to be kind of more than what they are, right? There's a lot of hype attached to his name, and
Yeah.
everyone's excited to see where he goes next. I mean, obviously Bochi was amazing as well.
Mhm.
How much influence do you think him as an individual is having on whatever he works on?
I think it definitely has a lot of influence, but rather than on the animation side per se, it has a lot of influence in kind of being able to craft a product that is able to tell a story and understand its priority very well, both from a standpoint of timing and also from a standpoint of the main themes of the story. In this sense, I would argue, connecting myself with the kind of sort of like discourse that I was starting before, that while Frieren wasn't really able to have the same kind of animation muscle top to down kind of like structure that Dungeon Meshi had, Saito was definitely able to salvage a lot of things that in a different production with a different director would have been like way rougher through his great explanation of what the intent of each scene was supposed to be. Which is something that I would argue a lot of other directors like are not necessarily as good at to kind of like pass on this kind of vision to the end. And I think that a lot of other sort of like Sakuga anime that are included in the nominees and got some good amount of votes weren't really like able to do that as well. Dan Da Dan definitely one that struggled in the less important moments. Stuff like Makeine ended up having the same issue. And when it comes to stuff like with Story or Kaiju Number 8 or Undead Unluck, we are talking about most, at least for me, more like there are more misses than actually the shots that actually were able to go the right direction in that sense, despite having a lot of also interesting moments as well. So in this sense, I would argue, yeah, like he's definitely like a great influence. But when it comes to the being able to keep the finished product clean and being able to really sort of like create something that feels consistent, we definitely have to give it to Nagasawa Reiko for sure, because she really did an amazing job as the character designer in Sousakan. In a way that I would argue you don't really see that many character designer going that above and beyond that way, even in this list of like sort of like the most high quality shows of the year.
And that's what these awards are all about. So I want to thank you, Far, for coming on. I mean, I know that we're really privileged to have someone so knowledgeable about the industry to come and talk with us.
No biggie. I'm just a guy.
I just a guy. But thanks. Move on. We're moving on with the show.